Do you need grace? Tired of feeling judged by Christians? Stay tuned as we look at God, golf, and grace with Dr. Doug Rehberg.
Welcome to Church Hurts and the good, the bad, and the ugly about church, religion, and spirituality with a dash of recovery thrown in. If you've ever had questions about the church, maybe a bit jaded in your attitude toward religion, well, you've come to the right place. Our host, he was an honors philosophy student, ordained a Presbyterian minister, planted 3 churches, taught at a prestigious university, but now he's just an aging curmudgeon who never quits asking the question why. The host of Church Hurts and Dr. John Bash.
God, golf, and grace. I've seen huge cultural shifts in my time. A comment worthy of one who admits to being an old curmudgeon. One of those shifts was in the role and status of clergymen. Growing up, clergy were among the most respected professions in America. A local minister was revered in a way, often asked to open public meetings in prayer, provide benedictions at political functions, sought for wisdom in times of crisis, and appreciated for his willingness to visit shut-ins, perform funerals, and preside over weddings. Often his counsel was sought the way professional therapists are today. While historically clergy have been among the most educated people in society for over 2,000 years, they've also been notoriously underpaid, treated at times as the help, tipped a little extra at Christmas, or recipients of extra vegetables from the garden. There were other benefits, though, including sometimes a home that they could live in while they served the church, or a coveted free golf membership at the local country club, or at least an opportunity to play on Mondays when the courses were traditionally closed. Early in my ministry, I discovered these days were gone, which isn't saying I didn't pine away wishing for them. Ministry as a profession was being stained daily by abuses as educational qualifications for ordination were watered down, as many independent and congregational churches gave up on grad degrees. Today, we have as a guest a man who straddled that generational gap as well as any I've known. Highly respected in his community, he honored his country club for their generosity to him. He used their fairways to minister to many and find refreshment for his own soul. So today, let's welcome back to Church Hurts and the Reverend Dr. Doug Rehberg with his new book, God, Golf, and Grace. Welcome, Doug.
Hey, John, good to be with you.
Doug, as I read your book, I was struck by how much it felt like the book everyone thinks they have inside of them, and it never gets written, and yours did, and it's good. What was the catalyst for writing it?
Well, the first book I wrote was more in the area of ministry, a design in developing leaders, and it was well received, not only here, but nationally. A lot of people are using that, but actually the beginning of this book was a colonoscopy. It was this woman, doctor said, Doug, I've changed my process since you were in here last time. I'm wanting you to drink that stuff at 6 p.m. and 1 a.m. So I thought, I want you in here by 5:30 a.m. So I figured, I'm not going to sleep. So there I am in my chair upstairs, about 3 a.m, wide awake. And I got a notepad and I just started writing, just doodling little stories about golf through my life. I got about 30 titles down, and, then it was time to go for the procedure, and I set it aside. A couple months later, my oldest daughter, who now lives in California for a time, she was overseas. She and my younger daughter were together, and we were on our patio with my oldest daughter's fiance. And she said, Dad, I never realized how important golf was in your life. And my younger daughter said, duh. And she said, no, listen. She said, I never really realized how many relationships you've built, how you've formed your life and ministry in many respects around golf, and meaningful moments and lessons learned. So those words kept resounding or reverberating in my mind. And then they corresponded with a 14-week sabbatical that I got from the church after, my last one was 2000, wrote a book for that. So I went down to Georgia, to the coast for a week or so, came back to Pittsburgh for a week or two, and then went to the coast of Maine for a month.
I know. I just mean all these nice places you're going to write a book.
So we go up there, and we're there for a day or two, and I start going down to the docks and find out there are 5 companies with 9 different docks. And finally I get to one where it's an independent, and I go and I meet the guys, and I said, can I just hang out with you? And after a day, I was working with them. So learned more about lobster, which I love, and ate a whole lot of them. And then after a couple of days on the dock, I thought, I can't just do this. And I actually left my golf clubs at home, a bone to my wife. Funny, I did rent them up there and played a couple of rounds. But I went out, took my tablet and folio and went out and sat on these gorgeous different beaches out on the rocks. And I just write these stories, and they began to flow. The problem for me was the tide goes in and out twice a day. So I'd get so engaged, I'd look down at the water level and have to scurry back to the shore. But after I left Maine in that month, I had 60 stories written. So I called my executive assistant and said, hey, do you think you can line up a typist for me? And she said, no, I'm doing it just like your last book. I delivered to her probably an inch or two of legal pad writing, and I went to Arizona, wrote some more. And so in 4 months, I had written the draft, and then it was another 5 months to get it all the way to be published. But that was the way it happened, kind of the convergence.
So here it is. Not many people watch this podcast on YouTube, but here's the book. I made you get out those manuscripts. So you have them right there?
Yeah, look, here's what I used to write.
Speaking of an old curmudgeon, you're worse than I am in terms of technology.
I think it's 370 pages handwritten.
Doug, I'm going to take you to one of your illustrations because it reminded me, and it's a fast read book. It really is. It's just story after story. But one of them reminded me of an older clergyman I used to play with, and he would take a lot of mulligans and humorously each time kind of saying, oh, well, kind of this is like his right as a pastor to do this. In light of that, tell us what NATO golf is.
Yeah, so I belong to a club up here, John mentioned, just a couple of miles from the church. In fact, it's sort of like the Bermuda Triangle. My house, the church, and the club are all like a triangle about 2.5 miles away from each other. But I have a friend here who's in ministry. He deals with graduate students, Chinese graduate students who come to the Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh. So we had a friend in Florida who he and his wife played golf, and they were visiting. And so we said, well, let's go out to Longview and play. So we tee off, and she's better than he is, way better than he is. And we get to the second hole, and he's hitting his second shot, and he hits it poorly, and he puts down another ball. And then he hits that poorly, puts down another ball. And finally, my friend who works with Chinese students, who's a bit taciturn, doesn't say much, he looks at him and said, what are you doing? And the guy said, well, we play NATO golf. And he said, what's NATO golf? He said, not attached to outcome. Now, what's fascinating is his wife was attached to outcome because she counted all her strokes, but he didn't. And I thought as I wrote this book, that was the part of the introduction. I thought about the way in which I was introduced to golf by my dad when I was 11 years old. And, he was never very good, but he never played alone. He always played. I never knew him to practice alone. He never had putting lessons, by himself in the living room. It was always relational. And that's how we started. He had a friend who had a son about my age, and we started to play. And so in that first introductory couple of chapters, I talk about the fact that my dad introduced me to NATO golf as well. He wasn't attached to the outcome of shots hit or scores gained. Rather, it was relationships. It was all about relationships. Even though he wasn't a tremendously verbal guy, he wasn't tremendously gregarious, he nevertheless introduced me to that relational dynamic, and it served me well over the years, even unintentionally. Here I am 50 years into golf, and I reflect back and think of all of the amazing relationships and the connections made that affected not only my life, but literally thousands of lives. And I can tell you some of that.
But I want to get into some controversial stuff, which is interesting in light of this book. But before I do, let me just mention, I like every show to mention that I work for Standing Stone, the ministry that works with clergy and full-time Christian workers. And Doug has been a real encouragement to that. For those of you who don't know about it, I'd encourage you to go to churchhurtsand.org. I am fully supported in the work that I do by the voluntary contributions of our support team, and just would love for you to be part of it. We live in a time, we're talking about golf, and it sounds nice here with Doug. Reality is, in this time post-pandemic, some churches and some pastors are really hurting and struggling. And so I'd encourage you to do that, churchhurtsand.org. And why I say that, I'd encourage you as well to go back and look at the show we had called Two Things I Hate. Kind of a weird title for a show, but our guest was Vodi Bakum. And I've seen him recently on a number of national news podcasts dealing with the controversial issues of race and just the stuff you're seeing in the news. So check out Vodi Bakum, a great spokesman, and we had a great time here. While you're there, hit the subscribe button. Having said that, Doug, that about race, you get some issues like about race in there, and you really, as a minister, you try not to be one of those political types, but you and I both kind of taken a stance on that issue all of our lives. But to tell us that there was a good one in the book, can you tell us about that?
Well, there's a couple ones that refer to it. You know, when I was in my graduate school years in Washington, D.C., in public administration, economics, and policy, I would go out to Congregational Country Club, and I worked out there. I was a caddy and worked in the bag room, and the pro kept trying to get me to work as his assistant in the pro shop. And I said, no, I want to be where the action is. I didn't really like the bag room so much, even though it was lucrative, wiping people's clubs off and all, but I wanted to caddy. And so there were about three or four Caucasian caddies, and I was one of them. And all of us tended to be young. And so I went out there the first day and met the caddy master, Jocko, and he asked where I was from. I said, I was really originally from Pittsburgh. He said, oh, Arnie land. And we started talking. And so over time, you know, I got accepted by the other caddies, and because I was there a fair amount, and in the caddy shack, and there's lots of stories there. But there was one old caddy. He was really ancient, in my opinion, as a 20-something-year-old. He was in his early 70s, and he was a real diminutive fella, about less than 5 feet tall. His name was Benny. He had a real raspy voice like that, and he was a bit of a, you know, kind of a guy that everybody loved. And he came over to us one day and said, you white boys need to recognize something. He said, if you've got two on your shoulder, you're carrying these two big, heavy Burton bags with lead bottoms, and then two on the cart, that means you've got their putters, and you're going to service them at the green, and they're expecting you to rake them fairway traps. You got hell on your hands. And I'll never forget that as a life lesson, because even though I'm not caddying anymore, except for myself, I think that really applies to so many circumstances. Not long after that, there was a caddy named Eddie who was at the club, and he caddied for a living there. And he did very well. He's a good caddy, and nobody disliked him. There was a guy who divorced his wife and married sort of a trophy bride. And so Sunday afternoon, Jocko said to Eddie, he's requesting you to go out with him. He goes out with them, and he's asked to read every putt, even by the woman. And so they come in, and all of a sudden, and I wasn't there at the time, what happened was he reported that the caddy, Eddie, was looking up his wife's skirt, which was ridiculous. But nevertheless, there was no deliberation. He was simply expelled from the club forever. I don't know what happened to Eddie. I don't know where he went, but that was a perfect example of who, you know, power and authority, and someone who was simply a pawn. What's also interesting, and I tell that story of expulsion, not only is there Eddie, who gets a raw deal, but there was a federal judge who everybody disliked. And he played in the high roller game every Saturday morning. They played for like $10,000 Nassau, which means the guy that lost the front nine could lose 10. If he lost the back nine, he'd lose another 10. If he lost everything, he'd lose 30. And so he has a putt to win the hole and win the match on what was the 17th green now, which is a peninsula green at Congregational, where they've had U.S. Opens. And I'm up in the fairway with another group, and I'm watching. He's over his putt, and all of a sudden I see him miss the putt, take his putter, and go back and kill the Canada goose that had just honked when he brought his putter blade back. He takes the Canada goose that he killed, put it on the cart, drove out, expecting that nobody would say anything. But because everybody hated him, the result of that was he was disbarred. He lost his country club membership, and he was shamed. Now, I juxtaposition those two examples because here's a guy of white high privilege that probably in some respects deserved what he got. And Eddie, who didn't deserve what he got, that's a perfect example of what so often happens in our culture.
The book is titled God, Golf, and Grace. And you talk about, we learn something in the book about all three of those things. I really do. So if people are into golf, you learn a lot about the golf courses and details and just some fun stories regarding there. But I reflected on the fact that a lot of the golf stories is really, I think about showing up. And I'm reminded of what happened in my life when my son was paralyzed, this huge watershed in my life. And we had a golf tournament here in California, and you were in Pittsburgh. And I thought, we didn't put that in the book because you flew from Pittsburgh to California. But I thought, you know what? Because that wasn't really a golf story, wasn't it? It was about showing up, not even to play golf, but to be there with somebody. And a lot of your stories were about guys you played with who it was just showing up and getting time together, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I was in Puerto Rico once and played the Trump International course there, and they had a tagline. It's on the back of the book. And on that, the tagline is not how you play, it's where you play. And I thought how arrogant that is. I would simply amend it. It's not how you play or where you play, but who you play with, the relationship. And, I've got a friend, I mentioned Kevin in the book, he's so classic. It seems like there's a continuum between people that die on every shot and they want to reprise the shot that they hit, whether good or bad. If it's bad, they'll take longer and they'll explain why they missed it. This Kevin, he'll tee a ball up and hit it in the woods and he'll say, that's unfortunate. Put another one down. You got to kind of love that because for him, for me, it's all about the relationships. And clearly there are people on the golf course that speak more than others, but everybody's subject that they love, every single person's favorite subject is themselves. And when you like people and you want to know about them, it's just a window into not only their work life or their marital life or what they're struggling with. It's a window into their soul. And I've seen that so often. So many times, once the round ends, the round doesn't end because you go and you hang out and you talk and so many wonderful connections. There's something about being on a course that's not lined with condos and it's out somewhere like the course I belong to. You don't see any houses, incredible vistas. You get people on the grass and they're hitting, and it's almost as if all the cares vanish, all the barriers are broken down, and people really begin to talk. I got a great story about that didn't make the book. There's a guy at the club I belong to who knows me as Reverend. Most people do, which I hate, but it is what it is. They get to know me and they recognize it's more than Reverend. He didn't really talk to me much, and we never had a top opportunity. So a year ago or so, we played an event. We're sitting around having dinner and drinks afterwards with probably 100 other guys. And he turns to me and says, you know something, Reverend? This is my religion. And I said, really? He's a retired surgeon. This is your religion? He said, yep, this is my religion. And I just smiled and said, well, Bob, I'm glad you brought me into your sanctuary today. That's all I said. And you know what? He never ceases to go out of his way to say hi to me and call me by name, developing a relationship. And that can happen anywhere, but it's so easy to happen on a golf course.
I was reflecting upon how many places in life do we get together with people and spend 3-4 hours. Unless you're, an alcoholic, a former profession of mine, or you go into a bar and hang out all day long or spend 3-4 hours. Where else in our regular lifestyle do we spend 3-4 hours like you do on a golf course?
Right. There's not many. And the great thing about it is there are these breaks, you're hitting shots, there's things you're doing. So it's not just a constant looking each other in the eye, which can get creepy. Sometimes you can go for a long period of time and nothing of substance, and then it happens. Not long ago, even a couple of weeks ago, I was playing with a couple of guys, and this guy's been dealing with the whole concept of God's grace in his life. In fact, he's in the last chapter. His name's Fred. And he was talking about, grace and whether he's sort of glorying in his old life and sin and so forth. And so, we started talking on 17T. Nobody was behind us. We probably talked for 5 minutes, and then we hit shots. Then he sends an email to the guy, all of us that are with him. And so we're going to get together again and continue that conversation. But that doesn't happen in many other places.
We're going to have to go soon, but I want to get kind of your favorite story out of the book. Maybe you can tie it into what your desired result from writing this, because you get healing in here. I mean, yeah. You've seen healing as a result of golf. Maybe you can end with that.
Well, there's so many to pick from, but I'll tell you one that sticks out in my mind. I have a friend named Terry, and we've traveled really all over. We go to Florida every year in the wintertime to play golf. And as a result of the relationship with him and the relationships we've made, we've been able to get a ministry started, and it's burgeoning with all kinds of finances. We were actually a meeting yesterday with 2 former corporate titans, and they're basically saying, whatever you need, we'll give you. And so all of that. So a couple of years ago, there's a guy here whose brother stole his business from him. It was a big landscaping business. I'm multi-million-dollar. He stole it from him, and that's a story in itself. But anyway, he tells me the story years before, and then with tears in his eyes, he said, Steve has stage 4 cancer, and he's in Florida, and I'd like you to pray for him. I said, well, I'll do more than that. Isn't he down there in Fort Myers? And he said, yeah. I said, well, that's where Terry and I are going next week. We'll not only pray for him, we'll go see him if you want us to. So he said, well, I'd love you, and I'll call. And so Steve wanted to see us. And so we get on the plane, and I said to Terry halfway down, I said, probably over Atlanta, I said, we've got a mission from God. I said, he said, what's that? And I tell him, we got to go see Steve, this guy's brother. So we're into playing golf a couple of days. He said, hey, we got to go see Steve. Yeah, so we called. We go there. And to make a very long story short, we are sitting at his dining room table with this guy's stage 4 cancer, and he starts crying. Terry's on one side of the table, I'm the other. He's at the end. And he said, I don't think God could ever forgive me for what I've done. And I said, Terry, why don't you tell him if that's true or not? And so Terry went through his story of brokenness and carnage. His dad committed suicide, and he had to clean up after it, and all of this. And Terry got to the gospel, which is, it's not based on our goodness or our performance, because none of us are good. It's not the approval of others. What matters is what Jesus did. And I can tell you, Terry said, as I sit here, if he can forgive me, he can forgive you. And so then Steve said, can we pray together? And so we had that time. And Steve, for the first time, acknowledged Christ as his Lord. And within months, he died and went and saw him. That's a cool story. And there's so many others.
Well, Doug, I want to thank you as a friend for many, many decades. I relate to that story because I figure if God can forgive you, he can forgive me.
Amen. Amen, brother.
Seriously.
How many hours we spent on those courses in Key Biscayne and other places?
We've done the phone as well. And just thank you. Thank you. This concludes season 2 of Church Hurts and. And if you haven't discovered yet how to use your podcast app very well, I encourage you to click around and you'll find a button which takes you to a list of our shows. And and good excuse to binge listen to some old ones you might have missed. We start out, the first two we had were actually in the studio, and they're a wonderful way to listen. We've had a lot of fun as we've traveled some important and challenging roads together. Our episodes have ended with the tagline I used for sermons through the 25 years I was in the pulpit: it's worth a thought. When one says something enough, it might fall on deaf ears due to repetition or loss of the original meaning intended. In my case, it's worth a thought is there as a reminder to ask myself if indeed the content preceding the closing was worth a thought, or was it just an empty-headed menagerie of words? Consider some of our travels. We've gone to Romania, India, London, Zambia. We've talked about architecture, sex abuse, golf more than once, paralysis more than once, parents, art, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, church abuse, shoes, children, race, justice, privilege, and the list goes on. But all of them with a theme of love and hope and encouraging grace running through them all. Whether you find them again on YouTube, where you can see us, or just go back on your podcast app to see all the shows, please take a moment to pray for all of our guests who gave a lot to us. And pray for those who support my ministry with Standing Stone, please, won't you? Men and women who give their lives to serve others, many of whom struggle with their own relationship with church themselves, but they don't give up on giving. Now to him, the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 3, now to him who's able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think, according to the power at work within us. To him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. And that's worth a thought. This is John Bash for Church Hurts and. Go and enjoy God today.
Well, that was worth a thought for sure, and brings us to the end of this edition of Church Hurts and. Next week, it's rumored we'll be walking on the edge of controversy, stirring the pot of denial, and finding movement of the divine. Our host, Dr. John Bash, is a shepherd with Standing Stone, a nonprofit ministry committed to caring for pastors and Christian leaders at risk of leaving the ministry prematurely. Come visit us at churchhurtsand.org. Tell us your story while you're there. Until then, remember, church hurts isn't the end of the story. Now go into the and enjoy God today, won't you?